All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Capital Region Rescue Thinning meeting today. Just a reminder, please go ahead and make sure your microphone is muted and that your video is off throughout the presentations, but once Terence is done presenting, we've got a small crowd, so certainly feel free to turn your camera on, unmute yourself, and ask away. If you do have any questions that you'd like to address during the presentation, go ahead and open up that chat icon and you can enter them into the chat box there. So I am Mike Basedow with the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to give a shout out to Valent for sponsoring all of our thinning meetings so far this season. So we are very appreciative of their support. So with that, I am going to turn things over to Dr. Robinson, and he'll walk us through his suggestions for rescue thinning.
Good afternoon, folks. It's the end of the thinning window. And what I hope to do today is to, are you seeing my screen the way it should be, Mike, or are you seeing the next slide?
Right now I'm seeing in the normal PowerPoint view. So if you can hit the full screen, I think you should be good then.
Where's the full screen?
I think it's, if you go to the bottom, you should have that, or yep, sort of go one more to the right. The one that looks like a screen. Yep. Or is there for a second and then it popped back out.
Okay, that should be the correct way to look at it.
Yep, looks good.
So we're at the end of a long thinning effort. And I hope that most everybody who's made an effort to prune to the proper bud load and then thin sequentially has already accomplished all the thinning they need and will not need this additional rescue spray. But if there are people who still feel and measure that there's still an excessive crop load on their trees, you still have this one last opportunity, which really is now to spray one more spray. Let's talk about how we would decide whether or not to do this last spray. So the warm weather that we had during bloom resulted in a fast and rapid bloom, but with good bee flight and good initial fruit set. After that, those who applied blossom thinning sprays, those went on under very warm conditions, and it seems like they did a great job. The petal fall spray was applied under slightly less warm conditions with a more moderate carbohydrate deficit. But the fruit growth measurements that Mike's taken in the Capital District indicate that that spray gave very good thinning. Now, last week, the 10 to 13 millimeter spray was not applied under very favorable conditions for thinning. It was cooler and there was a carbohydrate surplus. And results to date look like that we got modest thinning all the way to good thinning. It turns out, in my opinion, as I've looked and heard people talk, that most blocks so far in the Hudson Valley and probably in the Capital District probably have had enough thinning, and it's time to end chemical thinning for 2022. But where more thinning is needed, then we suggest you go in and spray one last time at this degree day window between 300 and 350 degree days. And you'll see in the next couple of slides that we're in that window. Now, Mike sent his technician out to measure fruits at Clifton Park today, and I want to talk about two results. The top chart shows the thinning that we've achieved with Gala. Now, as we work our way from left to right on that top chart, you'll see that after the petal fall spray, we took measurements on the second measurement on the 23rd of May, and it predicted there was 396 fruits still growing on the tree with a target of 100. So that was essentially 4 times as many fruits as we wanted. But we had achieved significant thinning out of that bloom and petal fall spray, going from about 630 potential fruits down to 400. Then over the next several days, without any additional spray, A few more fruits stopped growing, and so that a second time they measured fruitlet diameters on the 27th of May, it was predicting 333 fruits, but still 3 times as many fruits as we wanted. Then the petal fall spray went on. I think Mike told me somewhere around the 24th or 5th of May. And so that impact of that spray, we wouldn't pick up until today. And so the measurements today indicate that 176 fruits are still growing. Now that shows that that 10 millimeter or 12 millimeter spray did substantial thinning. It reduced the fruit set on Gala down to a more reasonable number, to 176 fruits. What do you do now? We got 1.7 times as many fruits, or we've got 76 extra fruits on those trees. I'm going to give you a suggestion in just a minute, and I'll say it here first, and I'll put it in writing in a later slide. If at this point you have more than twice as many fruits on the tree as you want, it calls for a new spray, the rescue spray. If, however, you have less than twice as many fruits, which is this case, between what I'm saying 1.5 times as many fruits as you want and 2, then it's a judgment call. The grower has to make a judgment whether he wants to put on more thinner, since he's relatively close to the target and could overshoot the target. If, however, you get to this stage and you have less than 1.5 times as many fruits as you want, I would suggest not ever spraying again and just adjusting that with some hand thinning. And I'll show you that recommendation in writing so nobody misunderstands in a minute. In the bottom chart is Honeycrisp measured at Clifton Park, and this is a dire result, indicating that when we came in after the petal fall spray on May 23rd, it looked like there were still 181 fruits growing and the target was only 65. So basically more than twice as many fruits, getting close to 3 times as many fruits as we wanted. And so we recommended that an additional spray at 12 millimeters be applied. However, the data that came in on the 27th and now on the 1st indicate way over thinning. Now, I just got this result about half an hour ago, and I haven't had a chance to really study the data. So before I call this a complete disaster and over thinning, I want to study the data and see if it really is the case. The grower looking at the trees doesn't think it's that bad, but certainly this would be a serious cause for concern, and we'd have to try to do a retrospective on it to see what happened. The model should have worked well, and the 181 fruits after the petal fall thinning should have been the correct number. So let's not put too much weight on this at the moment. We'll figure it out, and then Mike can let everybody know really what happened there. But I think the Gala data looks good and indicates that we've done a great job with thinning. We didn't quite get the full amount of fruit off, but we're relatively close, so probably I would not spray again. So at this point in time, it really is important to figure out what you've accomplished and whether you really do need another spray. Now, for those people that decide they do want to spray one more time, now is the window. The chart on the top shows that bloom, in this particular case where we're putting on the 11th of May, gave a serious carbohydrate deficit during bloom, and people that applied bloom thinners had pretty good results. By the time we got to the petal fall window, which is more on the 17th of May up through the 20th of May, we still had a carbohydrate deficit, which was great and helped us get good petal fall thinning. And on the previous 2 slides, you can see that the petal fall thinning did achieve something this year because of the deficit and the nicer temperatures when it went on. However, if you go forward to May 24th, when the 10 to 13 millimeter window opened, and look forward to the 27th of May, it was in a period of a significant carbohydrate surplus, which is not conducive to thinning. in these cases, the tree often can withstand the chemical thinner with little response. It looks like, however, though, the full rate used on Gala at Clifton Park did give substantial additional thinning and helped us get very close to the target. Now, if we look forward, on the bottom chart, you'll see that the 300-degree day window opened on yesterday, May 31st, and we'll go through about Friday, June 3rd. And so anytime in those 4 days that you want to spray would be within this window. But it's a period, if you look in the upper chart, of increasing carbohydrate surpluses. When you look at the individual days, there's no real deficits except yesterday a good deficit because it was 90 degrees, and today a mild deficit because it's shady, as it's cloudy. But after that, it's all surpluses. And so the 7-day average is going to be positive. Thus, if you want to spray and you really need thinning, and I emphasize you have to know that you really need thinning, you would put on a full rate and even increase that rate by 30%. So based upon this data, the best timing for anybody who still needs thinning started yesterday, Tuesday, May 31st, and goes through Friday of June 3rd. Pick the best time that you want to spray in that 4-day window. I don't think you should wait anymore for fruits to size, because they're going to rapidly size beyond the 20 millimeter diameter and beyond which they just don't thin at all. Over this next several days, the temperatures are not going to be high. They'll be in the mid 70s and an average carbohydrate balance of at least plus 20. This will give very mild thinning. Remember that at 18 millimeters, whichever thinner you spray has limited efficacy and is very mild. On top of that, the carbohydrate model indicates there won't be a deficit to help us achieve good thinning. So it will be mild thinning. To help us, though, we have had very good luck in the past under these conditions of adding a little bit of oil as a penetrant to the spray tank. Our recommendation is 1 pint of spray oil, and that will certainly increase the uptake of either Maxell or NAA that goes on. In almost all cases, when you get to this stage, the bottom part of the tree has been thinned enough. And so we suggest that if you do put on an 18 millimeter spray, that you close completely bottom half of the nozzles on the nozzle bank, leaving 100% of the spray directed to the top half of the tree. The chemical options right now are basically just 7 and oil. 7 and oil will thin at this stage, and the oil helps that. The one we've had the best success with over the years is Maxell 7 and oil. NA and 7 and oil works, but once fruits get past 16 millimeters, NA is very ineffective. The fruits become tolerant of NA once they're bigger than 16 millimeters. An alternative for those who don't want to use Carbaryl is Maxell, NAA, and oil. In cases where you have more than twice as many fruits as you need, I'd suggest, because of the high carbohydrate balance and no deficit, a full rate of Maxell, which is 64 ounces on a tree row volume dilute basis, and a pint of Carbaryl and a pint of oil. For Honeycrisp, which I don't think there's probably any Honeycrisp blocks that need more thinning, it seems to have thinned out very well all over. But if you have the case where you didn't thin it well enough in the beginning, then a more moderate dose of Maxell of 48 ounces of tree row volume dilute basis and Carbaryl and oil is justified. Fuji and Golden Delicious often do not thin well enough and often require more thinner, and so those would receive the high rate of Maxell, Carbaryl, and oil. Now remember what I talked about in the last meeting, that to calculate the amount per acre, you have to use my examples of a rate per 100 and calculate a concentration factor. And so in this case, I've given 2 examples. If your tree row volume is really 200 gallons to put on a full dilute spray in your orchard. But you're to save trips and save water, you're only spraying half that, 100 gallons, then the concentration factor is 2. If it's a smaller orchard that doesn't measure 200, and suppose it measures only 150, but you're still spraying 100, then the concentration factor is 1.5. So the way you would calculate the rate per acre is take my rate per 100, and then we'll use an example of 64 ounces per 100 of Maxell, times it by the concentration factor of 2, that gives 128 ounces or a full gallon. And if you're spraying 100 gallons to the acre and your sprayer holds 500, that means you can spray 5 acres. Therefore, you'd put in 128 times 5 or 5 gallons in the spray tank. I don't use this concentration factor for adjusting the amount of 7 or carbaryl or the amount of oil. That's strictly based on the volume of the sprayer and 1 pint for every 100. So on a 500 gallon sprayer, you'd put 5 pints of carbaryl and 5 pints of oil. Now, before I get to my summary slides on what I think you should do about thinning, I wanted to throw in this recommendation we're making about repeat bloom sprays with Ethifon starting now for hard to manage varieties like Honeycrisp and Fuji. So for years, we've recommended the #1 option, and for mildly biennial bearing varieties, ethereal or NAA, beginning when the fruits are 25 millimeters, which probably this year will be about June 15th. And so you'd start a series of 4 summer sprays of either ethereal or NAA. But that hasn't worked in many years. It works some years, but not all years. And we think that the reason is that June 15th or June 21st date, which often we suggest for more northern areas, is too late. So for these strongly biennial bearing varieties like Honeycrisp and Fuji, we're now suggesting to start a series of 4 ethereal sprays when the fruits are much smaller, 16 to 18 millimeters, or this week. And then respray at 10-day intervals till you get 4 ethereal sprays on. Because ethereal can thin, the first spray we suggest be used at a very low rate, which is a ½ pint per acre. But the last 3 sprays of the 4 spray series be put on at the higher 1 pint per acre rate. Often that takes you to the end of June. Once we get into July, we don't like to add more ethereal because it starts to affect the premature ripening of Honeycrisp. But we do think that some additional return bloom incentive is good. And so after you get to the 1st of July, we suggest adding a couple more sprays of NA into whichever insecticide, fungicide spray goes on in July. An additional proviso that I should have put on this slide, but Mike is going to publish a little update which has this more detail in writing. Don't ever spray ethereal when temperatures are above 80. So later this week, it looks like you'll have a series of days of the mid-70s, and so maybe Friday or Saturday might be a good day if you're going out with your next insecticide or fungicide spray to throw Ethifon into the tank. Let me summarize what I think is happening and what I think you should do. I think most blocks have probably had enough thinning. But if you feel that a particular block needs more thinning, I would ask you to assess the crop load. The best way to assess crop load is with a series of fruit diameter measurements. But if you haven't done that, you can't really do it in one day. It has to be done over several days. So I suggest an alternative, less accurate, but pretty good way to do that. Go out and physically count a couple of trees. Count only those fruits that are big. Don't count the ones that are really small, because those are going to fall off anyway. And if when you're done with your count, the fruits will look like they're growing, you have more than 2 times the final target number of fruits that you want, I think you should spray another spray today, tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. However, if you've done a reasonable job thinning, and the crop load when you count fruitlets on trees is already under 2, but it's between 1.5 times as many and 2 times as many fruitlets that you need to get to harvest, then it's a grower choice. You have to use your own judgment on whether to spray or not spray. But certainly, if you've thinned well enough that the crop load is down to less than 1.5 times the target final number, don't spray again. It's very difficult to just shave off a few fruits with a rescue spray. It's too risky. So my most important suggestion is to count some trees and you judge which ones are still growing and which ones are small. Any fruit that's about 5 or 6 millimeters smaller than the big ones is not going to stay on. So if your big ones are 18 millimeters and your little ones are 9, they're not going to make it. They're going to fall off. Don't count those. Count those that are 18, 16, maybe 15 and up. And when you get those counts, then determine if you're with one of these 3 categories and make your decision. We're in the window right now to apply a rescue spray. Started yesterday and it goes through Friday. If you do choose to apply a rescue spray, make sure you calculate the proper amount of thinner to go on the sprayer using the concentration factor. You'll need full rates because it's cool. It's not really hot. There's no carbohydrate deficit. There's only a surplus. Make sure that only the top nozzles of the sprayer are on. All of the bottom nozzles need to be turned completely off. Add 1 pint of oil per 100 gallons to the mix. And then lastly, remember that the ethereal sprays for return plume could start this week or next week, but for strongly biennial bearing varieties like Honeycrisp and Fuji. So that's all I wanted to present today. I'd be happy to talk about it more with any of you, and I hope that almost everybody's done thinning.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Terence. With that, I would like to open the floor to anybody who has specific questions for Terence. Please go ahead and you can turn your camera on, unmute yourself, and feel free to ask directly at this point. We do have a fairly small crowd, so you're more than welcome to do that.
Hey, Terence, Dan Wilson, Hicks Orchard.
Yeah.
Late window thinning for Cortland's. I've got, it looks like no thinning effective from earlier attempts. So I've got, 3 to 5 fruits per cluster. They're ranging from 20 to 14 millimeters. Tree's pretty heavily set.
So you're on the outer edge of being able to get any fruit off. And
yeah.
Unfortunately, Dan, we've had very poor luck with NA. I would prefer NA on Cortland's, but those fruits are just too big and they're almost completely insensitive to NA. So what I would end up suggesting is a Maxell and oil, no carbaryl, just the Maxell and 7, and a modest rate of 48 ounces per 100, but put the oil with it. Nothing else, just Maxell. Well, you can have a fungicide in there and insecticide if you want, but no other thinner. The trouble with carbaryl is that you'll start knocking off really big fruits and they'll keep falling and maybe you go beyond what you want. So just some Maxell and oil.
I noticed in the recommends talking about Ethifon, and I hadn't heard you mention that as a possibility. Is there?
Yeah, it also is a possibility. We've done a number of years of looking at Ethifon and oil or Maxell and oil. And unless you get really warm temperatures, Ethifon does nothing. That's why I'm saying we can use it as a return bloom spray because the temperatures are moderate. If you had temperatures in the 80s, you can get thinning from Ethifon and oil. But if you wait, I don't know when the next 80-degree period is, but by that time, your fruits might be 25 millimeters and you're probably completely out of the window of thinning. So I think your only option with these moderate temperatures that are forecast is to go with Maxell and oil.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, I want to qualify that. Sorry, I was just asleep at the switch. This year, Valent has introduced a new thinner called Exceed, which thins at big fruit size. They're not selling it on the open market, but their rep, which is Jim Wargo out of Connecticut, will work with individual growers. And that would be my preferred option if you can get him to get you Exceed in the next day. And then a combination of Exceed plus Maxell will do a really nice job, because Exceed works at large fruit sizes, but it also doesn't work too well once fruits get past 20 millimeters. So you're kind of up against it if your bigger ones are already 20 millimeters.
Great, thanks.
And just to add to that, Dan, I do know a rep that has some Exceed on hand. So if that is something you'd like to try, I could shoot him a message and try to set you up with that. Just give me a shout and I'll see what we can do turnaround time wise. All right. Any other questions for Terence? Well, Terence, I would like to just double check on when you mentioned shutting off the bottom half. Would you then be readjusting your TRV concentration calculations based on that new GPA that you're working off of?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for reminding me of that. I should have mentioned that. So let's suppose that you have your sprayer set up to spray 100 gallons, but the bottom nozzles are only putting out a third and the upper nozzles 2/3. So if you shut off so let's assume the bottom nozzles are putting out 33 out of the 100 gallons, and the upper nozzles are putting out 67 out of that 100 gallons. If you shut off all the bottom nozzles, you've now dropped from 100 gallons per acre to 67. That requires a new calculation of the concentration factor. Let's go back to my example where I said the trees were 200 gallons and we're spraying 100, and the concentration factor there was 2. But now that we've shut off all the bottom nozzles and we're only spraying 67, the concentration factor is basically 3. So then you would put in 3 times the chemical to get the right amount per acre. Again, not concentrating the oil or the carbaryl if you use the Maxell 7 and oil. But once you shut off nozzles, it just simply requires you to recalculate what fraction of a dilute spray you're putting out there with just the upper nozzles.
All right. Great. Thank you, Terence. Any other questions before we log off for the day? All right. Well, then
Okay.
I'd like to thank you again, Terence.
You're welcome, and have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.